Good evening, and welcome to Conversations Around the Diocese, a program brought to you by We Are the Church. Please note that the views expressed here are solely those of the speakers and do not represent that of the Anglican Diocese of Jamaica and the Cayman Islands.
Good evening, brothers and sisters. Welcome again to Conversations Around the Diocese, episode 11. And today, we just want to welcome all of you and hope that we'll continue to share as we go along. Now, Conversations Around the Diocese has three very important objectives. One, it is to provide a forum for people to have open conversations around pertinent issues. Secondly, it helps people to navigate the world from a theologically and scripturally informed perspective. And thirdly, to equip people to pray aright. Now, the topic for this evening is the Church's response to the Middle Eastern conflict. Now, before I introduce our speaker for this evening, I wanted to share some information with us regarding the Middle East. All right, so as we're seeing here, the Middle East is made up of parts of Asia and also of Africa as well. Now, as we take a closer look at these countries, we find that there are 17 countries, and these are part of the Arab world as well. Now, most of us may be aware of some of the countries. And as we see there, we have Iraq, Iran, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and even the Sudan as well. And these are the actual countries, and we have the matching flags that are to the left of your screen as well. Now, we won't go through all this, but I'm just giving you some information to kind of get in the groove of the conversation tonight. Now, I'm going to allow our speaker to talk a lot more on this, but we just wanted to point out some facts about the conflict in the Middle East. And we see that it dates back quite a while, 1400 years ago. And it stems around one main question: who would take over from the Prophet Muhammad? And of course, there are now two main groups or branches of Islam. So we have the Sunnis and we have the Shiite Muslims as well. But all of this has led to another pertinent question. What is a dominant sect? Is it the Sunnis or is it the Shiite Muslims? Right, so that's just a little teaser as to what we're going to be looking at this evening. So our guest for this evening is Mr. David Henriques. And Mr. Henriques is a member of the United Congregation of Israelites in Jamaica and a spiritual leader from the year 2000 all the way to 2020. So I'm going to invite him to share his presentation now, and we take it from there. Mr. Henriques?
Good evening. Thank you, Marlon, and welcome everyone. Good afternoon or good evening. Difficult to know exactly where to start, but since it is from a Jewish perspective, right, I may well start from this perspective, from this point, is that Israel is the only non-Arab state in the entire Middle East, pretty much. Right now, I say non-Arab or non-Muslim. You could take it. It's not exactly the same, but it is essentially. So Israel stands as this little country, basically in the middle of this huge ocean of other larger Muslim Arab countries, and basically has to exist. And one might say that the whole issue in the Middle East, when you're not looking at Muslim conflicts, as Marlon mentioned, between Sunni and Shiite or other Alawite or other sects, is between the Jews and the Arabs, then, if you wish. Okay, and it is a very long and difficult road to travel to really understand what may have caused the issues that are now happening in the Middle East, because it's not only religious. If it was only religious, you probably wouldn't have as much an issue as it is, more so, in my opinion, a good bit political and power driven. Okay, so I want to stop there just for a minute and go back to, I suppose, the topic that says, how do religions, how can religions cure or help to fix the issues within the Middle East? And I would love to say that we need to step back a little bit and understand our roots. Our roots, Arab or Muslim and or Jewish and non-Jewish roots in the Middle East, stem from basically the same person, and that was Abraham. Abraham, the first Hebrew, if you wish, the first person who accepted a monotheistic point of view, perspective on life. And one son went one way, the other went the other. He had a son, Ishmael, and he had a son, Isaac. And it is from these two strains that developed, eventually developed the Muslims, and eventually developed Judaism and the Jews. So if you were to go far enough back and start to look at it from this perspective, then you will find that there are not as many issues as one might think. But people don't want to do that. It's very difficult for them to do that because it affects their political perspective and thus their power. And as a result, there's a lot of misinformation, a huge amount of misinformation that is shared on our through books, through media, through now social media, that cloud many of the real issues that exist, right? May exist and could be dealt with. Let us just take one more recently. Afghanistan is a very potent situation at the moment. You have Taliban, but all of Afghanistan is basically a Muslim country. But you have Taliban and you have others, and so therefore, and then you get the issue where they don't like the Jews. But why? The Jews aren't affecting their way of life. Israel isn't affecting their way of life. It isn't even interfering in their way of life, to be very honest with you. I'm not going to get political on it because it tends to be many other thought processes. But we have, there's a lot within the Arab world, within the Muslim world, that it to be able to, in my opinion, please, to be able to get what they want, the power that they want, or to the political pull or whatever it is that they want, they need a scapegoat. And in many cases, Israel is that scapegoat. So let's go back again to biblical. God, if you accept the biblical word as it is, God gave this piece of land to the Israelites. They had it before. They had to leave it because of issues such as hunger and whatever, and if you look at it from the point of Jacob, Jacob went then now to Egypt. He lived in an area in Egypt that was scoured out for these Hebrews, and they lived comfortably well, right? Until one Pharaoh decided that they were getting too large and too powerful. So he enslaved them. So they were in slavery for X hundred years, and they moved. And eventually God, through Moses, and you all know the Bible, they were allowed to leave that state of slavery and eventually inhabit this piece of land, which the promised land, as it were, right? And they were given that to live in, which they did for many, 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 many years, thousands of years before they were again thrown out, but not entirely so, in and around the destruction of King Solomon's temple, the second temple, right? And and then they eventually had to inhabit other aspects, other countries in the world. So Israel always, Jews always had a presence in Israel. And of course, there were other peoples around, Arabs, if you wish to call them that. And the whole process after that with the Crusades, with everything that you basically mentioned before, the Prophet Muhammad creating Islam, as it were, because it wasn't exactly that before, formalizing the whole Muslim faith. And from there on, there's been a conflict not only with the Jewish folk, but with the Christian folk as well. That's what the Crusades were, essentially, right? All fighting over this one little place called Jerusalem, okay, which lay in Jewish hands, as it were, okay. So I know I've simplified the thing. I'm not a theologian, and I'm not going to presume that I have all the absolute facts and the details. That's not what I'm here for. It was just to ask the question, how does religion help the crises? So we know that the crisis, what I'm trying to get here is that the crisis, the situation that we are faced with now, is not a new crisis. It's not something that just popped out of nowhere over the last 20, 30, 50 years, 100 years. It's been something that has been ingrowing for a long, long time. And it is not entirely, it's definitely not easy to figure out how to, there's not one solution, put it that way. Okay, some people may say that, oh, the solution is to give back the Arabs all of Israel. Why? The question is why? What did they do with it before, when it was Palestine? Right? They didn't. Nothing would happen there. It was a pretty much dead piece of land. Okay, it's the Jews that came after the Holocaust that built this place, rebuilt this place to be a significant force in world everything. Okay, but so you have to look at it as along a number of steps. Okay, and if you want to get into the little details of what actually happened and not what the media sometimes puts forward, that we can kind of discuss if you'd like. And I love the questions. I really want the questions. It tends to generate a lot more thought for me. But what I am trying to say in principle is that it is a whole lot more complicated than you think, right? And there's no one solution. Okay. I don't know if I know I haven't gone over my time, but it's okay. Maybe I best stop now and hear the questions. Maybe I can expound or do a little bit more, to edify what has to be, and get into a little more detail. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Henriques.
You're getting seen, Mom.
Thank you for sharing those thoughts with us.
All right.
Participants in the Zoom room, viewers on Facebook and YouTube, you can always put your questions in the chat, or you can raise your hand and we'll identify you to ask your questions. Now, I got so excited about the conversation that I didn't even introduce myself. So I am Marlon Simpson. I am a priest, and I'm also an associate clinical psychologist. And I'm hosting tonight, as you can see, and we have a very interesting conversation coming that we have been dealing with. So we really want to hear from you. We want to hear your questions surrounding the Middle Eastern conflict. And even though it has just been a few minutes worth of conversation, I already have a lot of questions, but I want to hear your questions first. We want to hear what's going on in your mind. What do you think about this topic and what has been said. All right, so our first question is, should there then be a stronger sense of ownership or entitlement from Jews over Jerusalem?
Okay, that's a fair question, Rev. There is actually a very, very significant ownership and over it. In fact, they fought a war over it. You know, in 1967, I think, yeah, no, further than 1970s, and they actually fought a war to be able, and it is what, because remember, you know, let me go back a couple of steps. Remember that Jerusalem was divided. Okay, it was partly Arab, partly Jewish, controlled, and what happened was that, again, the Arabs would, you know, that there's the Wailing Wall, which says the last remaining wall of King Solomon's temple, right? And this is a very, very holy site for the Jews. Okay, they built a mosque actually during their occupation of Jerusalem, very near to it, and but so be it. And so they seem to hold a fair bit of sway in that, you know, in terms of what's important to them. But it's not their holiest site. The dome, or you know, in Jerusalem is not their holiest site. Their holiest site is in Saudi Arabia, in Mecca, right? That is where you journey to. So, but our holiest site.
Hi, Marlon.
Yes, Shanique.
So I just want to, you know, it's an interesting conversation that we're having, and we're sorry that we're having technical difficulties right now with Mr. Henriques, and we're working to get that back. But it's good to know that we already have a discussion going in our comment section on YouTube. And just to point out that somebody's already saying that it's fair to say that what Mr. Henriques has been saying about him being, you know, overly simplifying what is happening in the Middle East. It is a very complex conversation that we're having, and it goes into detail on lots of the things, but we won't be able to discuss it today. We'll have other weeks to discuss it. And also another comment is, can the religious and the political aspect be separated as it relates to the conflict in the Middle East? It's something that we continuously hear, and it's important that we have this discussion as it relates. And that's a good question, and I hope whenever we get Mr. Henriques back, that he can actually answer that, because that's a good question.
Yes, thank you for that, Shani, because this is a very interesting topic. And I mean, even some of the questions, or even not even the questions, some of the statements that have been made, I didn't even know that half of that was going on. And for him to say that it was, you know, or not as complex, or rather, it is very complex. It is something for us to really look into on a deeper level. And I really hope that we can get back Mr. Henriques so that we can ask him some of these questions.
Yes, right now the comments are going off in YouTube, and I really want to have this discussion. It's going to be really good, and it's a conversation that we need to have.
Definitely, definitely. So there's a lot of activity going on. I just ask you just to continue to put the questions, the comments in the chat until we get Mr. Henriques back. Go ahead, Eleanor.
Hi, interesting conversation. I just wanted, though, in the short time that we had Mr. Henriques, that there was so much that certainly I learned. The first point to note that certainly in terms of my understanding is that the issue is really a land dispute issue going way back. Sorry about that. Yeah, it's a land dispute going way back. And as you mentioned before, it is more political rather than religious. The question, though, is at the end of it all, which I suppose is part of the reason for our exploration, do we think that we will be able to achieve peace at any time, given how long the wars have been, how deep-seated some of these problems and disputes have been over periods? So my thing when he comes back would be to listen for do we think, despite how far back the problems go, that we can achieve any level of peace? And what would be some of the ingredients that could make for a peaceful existence going forward?
And that's a very good point, Eleanor. And additionally, one of the questions too is there a way that there can be unity among all of the religions in that region? Because so far we have been saying that the conversation has been circulating around the Muslims and the Jews. What about the other religions? You know, what can they bring to the table in order to facilitate this whole talk of peace? And it is interesting to note that it started with Abraham, and yet there seems to be such a struggle to maintain their historical and religious legacy. So it's as though it's being pulled in different directions, and we're here trying to understand.
I'm picking up Rev now.
All right, awesome.
I'm back, as they say. All right. Sorry about that.
All right, welcome back, Mr. Henriques.
Technology is a difficult issue. Eh?
Definitely.
All right, I'm here. All right, so I was telling you about, I think I broke off. I hope I'm not interrupting anybody right now. Should I come back in? That's where I left off, or?
Yes, please,
okay.
Continue.
All right,
continue.
so eventually, of more recent times, we have taken the control of Jerusalem, right? So Jerusalem is now is under Israel control again, okay, entirely. And but surprising, maybe not surprisingly, but typically of the people, we've not run out all the Arabs. All the Arabs that lived in East Jerusalem, as it were, because we took over East Jerusalem, have been quite allowed to live there, to worship there, to function there quite normally. Nobody has run them out. But so we do have control of Jerusalem now, and we're sure. But it is like a burning hot point with some Arab countries, maybe, or otherwise, to again, the political aspect of it, not the religious aspect of it, to want to take back, to reverse the situation. All right. So I hope that answers the question on Jerusalem succinctly, I hope. Okay. Anything else?
All right. Thank you for that, Mr. Henriques.
Right.
Yes, very good point. One of the questions that came up while we were waiting on you to come back,
right, yeah,
was how is it that we can facilitate the whole notion of peace? Is that even possible?
Well, okay, again, I was more political, but let me try. The notion of peace is based in the fact that if you don't shoot me, I won't shoot you. All right. Sorry to use maybe that terminology, but I suppose it does fairly well get to the point. The Jews, yes, there's always going to be a faction of Israelis or Jew that want to take back everything, but that's a very small faction, and that's really not, that's not politically how it really works, right? There are requests like situations with settlements and such like, but that is, where am I going now? Oh, come on. What is it that I don't know? Yeah, sorry, I'm back with you. It's that issue. So basically, if it is that we could get away from the political nuances or issues affecting the process, then you can get back to that peace. Because, and I know I'm speaking from an Israeli perspective or a Jewish perspective. Yes, I do know that. But the point is that I'm not seeing Israel attacking Arab countries before they are attacked. They're not the aggressors in this case, right? There's going to be a lot of argument, and I can imagine your listeners are saying, well, what about the, occupied territories and all of that kind of stuff? It's not. The Arab parts of Israel are being kept in those positions because there's no trust. There's no political will to change a situation that occurred, right? Religiously, it is a whole different perspective, right? I don't think that religiously there's that much of a difference between Arabs and Jews. There's still one monotheistic faiths. In fact, so many of their customs are identical, right? They all don't have the issue with eating treif, which is pork, and other foods that are not allowed. They circumcise their male children, right? As a way that you enter into the faith and stuff like that. So there are so many things that actually are the same, right? They pray 3 times a day. The more Orthodox Jews do the same thing, right? So religiously, there's not a divide, although one might want. It is really not, that's not where the divide issue, it is really political. Now, the question is that even the most holy Christian site in Israel is controlled by Arabs, right? Bethlehem is an Arab town, not a Jewish town, okay? If you want to call it, not an Israeli, it's within those, within the West Bank, okay? All right, and so it is controlled. So you're not getting, how do we look at the piece? If there's a political will, it'll happen, because again, and if the political will isn't whipping up the fervor, as it were, right? Then I don't think you'd see a lot of what is happening. To be very honest with you, stop there. All right. All right.
All right, thank you for that. I'm actually going to invite Eleanor to ask her question. Eleanor, you can go ahead. All right, so while we're waiting on her to come up, I actually had a question for you though. So since it is not a so much of a religious conflict as it is political, does the religious aspect of it play any major part in the conflict, any at all?
I must be very honest with you. From my perspective, I don't see it. I just don't see it. And I'll tell you why, Rev, as you will understand. Christianity has a number of different sects, as it were, right? Baptist, Methodist, etc., Anglican, Catholic, all of you. But not unless in other places, but certainly you don't see it. Maybe way back it happened, but and it did way back when you started to get the split outs. But I don't see the different Christian sects, although they have different beliefs in some respects, right? Being antagonistic. No, I don't know everything that goes on in life, but I don't see it. I don't hear it. I don't feel it. Whereas, and the same thing when you're looking at Jews and Arabs, there's a Jew is not going to really concern himself, to be very honest with you, with the Arabs' religious beliefs, because in fact what Judaism teaches you from the very get-go is respect for other faiths, for other beliefs, right? For as you can see, you can accept your God in many ways. The important thing is that you accept your God, right? And so I don't see that as being the fire point or the spark point. I mean, you're not going to find a Jew fighting an Arab particularly over what? Because he fasts in Ramadan, or because the Jew happens to fast at Yom Kippur. They're not fighting over the fact that the Jews should really follow Ramadan and vice versa. They would like it because every religious sect loves it, to think that they're the only ones and they're the only ones should run things, but that's not the case, and will never be the case. But I don't think they're going to find them war over something as simple as things like that, right? Okay. But so what the warring is over is, again, something completely different. I have a number of Muslim friends, and we enjoy the discussion on religion, on real faith, on God, and how that manifests itself, and maybe how the Quran then relates to the Christian New Testament, Jesus's doctrine, or in fact the Jewish Old Testament, right? And how how many similarities you find and very little differences. I don't think that is the case, because if you look at in other countries where Jews and Muslims live, even here in Jamaica, as a rather cogent example, you're not finding any issues. You haven't found the level of anti-Semitism that you see in other places, right? And so I don't think that's essentially the issue. I really don't.
All right. Well, thank you for that,
Right.
Mr. Henriques.
Right.
All right. So, brothers and sisters, you're hearing the conversation. I know that you are engaging and want to really share your views. So we're going to segue now and actually invite our social media coordinator, Miss Shanique Smith, to guide us through some more questions that you have been posting. So again, continue to post the questions, put them in the chat, and let's just keep the conversation going. Shanique?
Thank you, Marlon.
Got you.
And very interesting conversation indeed. And the chat is going crazy right now because conversations are happening right here on YouTube. So let me try and get into some of it. And I'm just going to point out some of the comments before I get into some of the questions from Mr. Henriques. And a comment was made earlier that there seemed to be no end in sight with reference to this conflict. Somebody asked, does Mr. Henriques see an end to this conflict before Christ comes to redeem his world? I know a lot of people have that question, right? But dialogue is happening in the chat right now. And I just want to pose one of the questions that was asked, right? And it's very important, as we discussed earlier about the political and the religious differences and what is really causing the conflict, right? So there are a question that was asked on Facebook, and it says, to what extent has the politics of the religious right militated against peace in the Middle East?
Wow, big question, Shani. That's a little bit more difficult, but I'm not sure I'm going to be able to handle it completely. But I feel that anything that is absolutely fundamental, that is fundamentalist in its outlook, whether you call it right, okay, let's call it right if you wish, okay, is going to mitigate against a lot of things happening, right? Because they're not willing to accept, in many cases, any form of compromise. And I think this happens all around, because in fact, it is the fundamentalist Muslims in some respects that are also fermenting a lot of the discontent, if you want, in that region, right? It is the fundamentalists, right? Not the reasonable ones, right? Not the middle of the roads, right? So yes, I think it will certainly not all go well for any quick solution if the two extremes are not willing to sit down and talk. So yes, I think it will. It will certainly be a little bit of a difficulty. Now, you're going to hear now, which is right, which sect is right, and that's another argument, right? Entirely, and then for another time maybe. Okay.
Thank you. Another question that was posed was, could Mr. Henriques speak to the role of NABA and the colonialism in the conflict?
Colonizing. Oh, I'm not sure where you're going to. I don't know, but the colonizing aspect is a little bit difficult. Are they asking me the fact, as I said to you, we're right in the beginning, right? That Israel, this place, the promised land, let us go back to that, was given to the Jews through God's will, and intention way back in the beginning of the Bible. And they live there. Now, yes, there were a number of conflicts prior to that, to them taking over everything, but that was understood and explained in the Bible. Now, the Jews lived there all these centuries, and they did all the centuries, and thousands of years, in fact. And to the latter, if you want to use, we call it the Common Era CE, right? That things changed when we got thrown out physically, and we were by the Romans at the time, because they were the Romans who were in charge at the time, and you wouldn't say that Jews really, it became an English protectorate, and they called it Palestine, and all kinds of people lived in there, right? And then when the Jews came back to this land, if you want to call it that, to this land, but only in 1945, 46, in that area, when the Second World War finished, right? And they, as you know, that was the Holocaust, and 6 million Jews were killed by Germans, by Germany and by Hitler, let us say Hitler, during that period. And Jews had nowhere to go. They had nowhere to go. They didn't. How do you feel when 6 million of you are butchered or murdered, if that'd be a nicer word, because they were killed, if you want to be very nice. And so where do you go? So the only place that they could figure that they would be safe from this sort of persecution, okay, was in this place that they knew as Israel, okay? So they went back there, as many of them as could at the time, went back there and settled it, okay? Now, they settled it, the English was still in control, they settled it, and that is when things started to go a little awkward, because the English didn't really want them there, okay? That's the history of it, but they were there, and they started to build the place. Now, there were small pockets of Arab communities in this Palestine space. They didn't run it as a country, it doesn't run as a country in itself. So they didn't colonize it in that sense, because nobody owned it apart from the English kind of overseeing it, right? So it's different to say that, well, okay, the Arawaks, if you want to use that, I know they're called, lived in Jamaica, and the Spanish killed them off and came into Jamaica and took it over, right? Or the English kicked out all the Spanish and took it over afterwards. It's a little different. It's a lot different, in fact, okay? Because they didn't come in there by force and kick out people. Again, you have to look at history. They came and colonized it and built it because they had nothing else, or they felt the Jews had nothing else, because their numbers had been whittled so terribly through the Holocaust, and nobody wanted them. Nobody wanted them. No country wanted them. They were a pariah, okay? So the only place they knew was the biblical place that they were given by God, and they came back there and built it. So I don't know if I've answered the question entirely, but certainly it's a different situation that happened. It wasn't that I went in there by force and killed out all the people in the place and took it over. It didn't work like that. Okay, thanks. I hope I've at least tried to answer it. All right, okay. Okay.
I'm sure that the chat will go off with all the comments that you just made.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yes. Truth it is.
But, yes. But just to tie into what you just spoke on as well, an earlier comment before you mentioned this one, from Garfield Ricardo was, what is Mr. Henriques' take on the apartheid type of conditions that Israel has imposed on the Palestinian people in Gaza and the West Bank?
Okay, so that word is used very loosely. I really didn't know that the Jews, the Israelis, took over and stopped people from participating, Arabs from participating and functioning in anything. Anything that was theirs. Apartheid to me was a regime that took over in South Africa that banned Black Africans from literally participating in any aspect of the country's leadership and many other things. All right. Okay. So what have the Jews done? They haven't stopped the Arabs from doing one thing. They haven't told them they couldn't worship the way they wanted. They haven't told them they could live the way they wanted. They haven't changed their customs. They haven't banned them. They have their own political parties, as it were, right? In fact, you may not like them, but they're certainly there, all right? They certainly are there. PLO is a political party that functions. It's them that don't want nobody else. It's not the Jews stopping them from functioning. What the Jews and what the Israelis are saying is that, look, guys, we can live, but we just have to know that if you want to come into Israel and into the Israeli land and work and prosper and whatever else that you want to do, nobody's stopping you doing that, but you can't come in there and kill our people because it's just not on, right? We won't allow that. So if you consider that apartheid, I think you got apartheid a little wrong, okay? Right? When you're dealing with, so what he may be saying then is that because the Jews have said, okay, this is your piece of land, what are you saying then? That the Arabs are then entitled to all of it regardless? Because if that is how you're looking at this whole issue of apartheid, I think they haven't quite got what apartheid was, right? I don't see that happening in Israel. I don't see Arabs and Israelis not living together every day comfortably, right? You have very, very rich Arab multimillionaires living in the West Bank and in Gaza, right? Israel provides everything for them that they need, right? And so I don't know quite, and if they wanted to have more freedom, just stop shooting me. And you can come and do what you want, right? Israel is not looking to take over Gaza and the West Bank. They may like to, some of the right wing, as we talked before, may well want that because they think it's their land, but that's not going to happen. Certainly not in the foreseeable future. So I think that the whole aspect of this word apartheid has to be looked at a little more in detail as opposed to what is actually happening in Israel. Okay? All right.
I have one last question to ask Mr. Henriques. And Father Major Campbell is asking, have we explained what being chosen means?
Yeah, Major Campbell, Reverend, how are you? Also, the word chosen is a loosely used word because, boy, if we were really chosen, how come we've been through so much? Right, so much grief since ever, right? Probably not the first, but the first significant nation to ever be put into slavery. Certainly all the history of the Jews throughout thousands of years being occupied by the Babylonians, being occupied by the Romans, being occupied by the Greeks, and all this time. You wonder what this chosenness really means, right? I would like to believe that our chosenness is in God's instruction to us that we must raise our standards, moral standards, ethical standards and everything, so that we can be a light unto the world, if you wish. I'm using a little few cliches, so excuse me, right? But so so God chose us to show or to guide the nations, if you wish. I use that again as a biblical terminology, but nonetheless, and to continue to do that. So our chosenness doesn't make us favorites. It certainly doesn't, because there's nothing in the Old Testament and thereon that indicates that there's anything been carved out specially for the Jews because of this chosenness. We were chosen to carry the heavy yoke, to show and to guide and to teach. And I think that is what our role, if you're looking at chosenness, may well be. Okay, whether we actually fulfill it or not as Jews, I don't know. Right? That's another argument. But certainly the chosenness doesn't mean favorites. I can assure you of that. At least I've never seen it in all my 60-odd years of worshiping as a Jew. I've never felt, more than burdened by the fact that I should, share and teach, what God's will is, Okay, so I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Henriques. And I will continue monitoring the comments in the chat, Marlon.
Okay.
All right, thank you for that, Shani. And I think so far we've been having quite a lively discussion.
Good.
So please continue to send your questions and your comments in the chat. All right. Mr. Henriques, do you have any other Well, or do you want to share some more on what's been happening overall, even in current times with the Middle Eastern conflict?
Wow. As I said, I'm not the best on it, but I'll say this much, that I've always felt that, let us say, those Arabs that were within this Palestinian land space, that were theoretically displaced, as it were, right? They have been used to a great extent, in my opinion, as really a cause celebrate for other countries. When you look at the actual numbers of people, right? Israel is a very small country, right? Its total population, it's bigger than Jamaica, but not hugely much bigger than Jamaica, right? Its population now stands at around 7 million or 8 million people in that region. 7 million more so, 8 million. And when you look at the countries that surround it, Jordan, Syria, Egypt, Lebanon to a lesser extent, those are its bordering countries, as it were, right? They are 50 times the size, every one of them, 40, hugely larger, let me put it that way. And yet still, why is it that they have never, ever seemingly felt that it was their moral role, then, if nothing else, to accept their Arab brethren into this country, their Muslim brethren into this country, into these countries, and allow them to live normally, right? In countries that are wholly their own people. Okay. Now, is it why? I've never quite answered that question, Rev. I really haven't, because I don't understand why. So why are you blocking me where it's not going to affect my population? Your numbers aren't going to affect our populations one little bit. They're dropping a hat, relatively speaking, right? Why have you stopped them from functioning? The Jews, you're in Israel, okay? You're in this whole land space called Israel, okay? You're in the West Bank. You still come to work. You can work in Israel. You can do anything you want. You can do business in Israel and everything. You want to go back and forth, that's up to you. You can live in Israel if you want. Nobody stopped them living in Israel, right? As long as you're peaceful and you're decent, then you can live there, no problem. But some don't, because they don't feel comfortable. But they come and pray in their mosque there. Anyway, so be it. And so I don't know I don't understand the logic, right? Again, I know the logic isn't religious, because there's no religion stopping them. And so there must be something else. And we know it, but we don't want to address it, because it agendas of bigger places, the agenda of Iran, not even so much Iraq, but of an Iran specifically, an agenda of, I don't know, Syria, which they're in turmoil. Why? Do you know why they're in turmoil? For this same reason. Their own groups can't come together, right? That's why, because the Alawites are fighting that they have to hold power, or as they feel like the Sunnis or the Shiites that are the other groupings will wipe them out. You understand? So I don't know. I've never heard or ever read that the Jews have any intention of wiping out the Arab population that lives within their midst. Just never known that. So I don't know how you actually get to that point without dealing with the politics of it. A little bit.
And thanks again for that.
Right.
But the whole thought of chosen, is that something that you need to look at? And while you're answering that, I'm gonna ask Eleanor to get ready to ask her question.
Yeah.
But that whole matter of chosen, as asked by Monique,
right.
How important is it to actually preserve that title from a political and religious perspective?
That's a big question again. Boy, hard ones. I think
we reserved the hard ones for you, sir.
Oh boy, you really did. And I'm not sure I'm good, but anyway, let's go. when you throw chosen, the word chosen, into any conversation, it indicates some kind of unique, special gift. I don't know, right? That you're looked upon, and given certain benefits that others don't get. That's how chosenness, when you throw it into a conversation, right? It's just I'll stretch it a little bit and say the same thing where they say, boy, you're born with a gold spoon in your mouth or a silver spoon in your mouth or something like that. We know what that means in Jamaican parlance, right? Is that you're chosen somehow, right? Through your color or through your family, whatever, you're chosen, right? And I'm really wary. So if those who use this chosenness, as you rightly say, to try and get a one-up on another group or another set of people, I think are doomed to failure, because it doesn't, again, this is not what chosen meant, as I said to you before, or I think chosen, how God looked at what chosen was. It wasn't to give you a one-up. It wasn't to, so they used it in the earlier biblical times, right? Because it was the word, that was the language of the time, right? It didn't have the same connotation, maybe, I don't know, right? Because remember, the Jews were the only ones that accepted this doctrine of monotheism at the time. Remember, none of the other existing nations around accepted this monotheistic points of view. So God came and said, look, you have to accept me as your unseen only source of everything, right? Of life, as it were. And others weren't willing to accept that at all until, again, way much later in life, many, many thousands of years after that. So you understand the whole process of evolution, as it were. So maybe in those days it was used in some of the biblical terms to give you some sort of a special feature. But your special feature is that you accepted God. I think, and not anything else. Not that you were going to be given some kind of power over people or power over life, because that's God's domain. That's not man's domain. Okay, man has taken it in some respects, in some places, in some times over the thousands of years, as we've seen. But it's God's domain, and I don't think the Jews ever were really. I'm not saying there weren't a few warlike ones, because they were, but it was never the principle. It's not the principle of Judaism to look at it from that perspective. Okay, I hope again I've answered it fairly well. All right.
All right. Thank you for that. No, that has raised a lot of questions for me, but let me hear from Eleanor first.
I love this. Okay.
I want to go back for a minute to go back to the issue of peace. Mm-hmm. And there is a school of thought that the Middle East will not see peace until Christ returns. In the earlier discourse you mentioned, in terms of what does peace look like, you spoke about, and to put it simply or crudely, you don't shoot me, I don't shoot you.
Right.
The question is that, to my mind, is not enough for there to be sustained peace. Mm-hmm. There was also the mention that because of the issue of the fundamental religion, the issues with fundamental religion, then a lot of us get stuck, or a lot of us defending our religious turf. And I want to explore a little bit, dissect it a little more. I don't know if anybody else can help in the conversation. What we're really asking for when we ask for peace in the Middle East. Mm-hmm. Is it just you don't shoot me, I don't shoot you, which is really just a truce?
That's right. That's a fact.
Not peace. Mm-hmm. And what I want us to dissect a little more is, what would peace look like, bearing in mind that we're looking at it from a Western culture. Mm-hmm. and the cultures and religions over there are different from our cultures and religions. So what peace might look like to us sitting nicely in Jamaica where 300 and something people dead every year is different from an ongoing war where religion is made to seem, as you said, a scapegoat, but the problem is really political. So do we need to move past religion, and what political and religious component do we need to look at in trying to achieve peace, if we believe that that can happen before Christ come back for his word?
Okay, can I go back to one particular point? Okay, look, can we look then maybe at messiahship? Can we look at the whole concept maybe quickly of messiahship?
Okay.
Okay, all right, so you're saying, yeah, quite understand and quite know what you mean, Jesus' time is going to come. Now, Jews also believe that there will be a Messiah. Now, you know our fundamental difference in terms of Old Testament, New Testament is that Jesus was not considered by the Jews at the time and by the Jewish faith at the time as the Messiah. Now, there are a number of discussions that can be had around that, and we know that, right? Okay, so we are still waiting for our Messiah, but are we waiting for what will cause this Messiah or to return? Okay, what is going to cause Jesus to come back, to be resurrected yet again? Okay, what is going to cause that to happen? Because this is a key argument, and I think it tends to deal with your issue to some extent. Jews believe that there is also the Messiah is due to come, but then there's a very significant belief in probably more liberal Judaism that the whole messiahship issue is not with a person or persons, as the case may be, but with all persons and how they live, bringing on what we call a messianic era. Okay, so it may also deal with what more is going to create this peace. If it is that we want to see peace in the Middle East or just about anywhere, who is going to do this? Are we waiting, and you talk about that, are we waiting for a Messiah to come to do this? Or is it a responsibility of every human being on earth to work towards this? Okay, if it is that we accept this concept of all of us, whether we're Christians, is Muslims, Hindus or whatever, to work. If it is we accept that it is our responsibility, each of us, to work towards this time, then this messianic era, then in doing so, or working towards this, you will find that maybe this real peace, this ability to reconcile our differences, period, right, will come about. And when we have reconciled our differences and we can live together without animosity then to each other, whatever that animosity might be, then you may have well heralded in this messianic time. Okay, the key shot is how hard are people, individuals, willing to work to this end. I don't know, again, maybe I've hit on it.
How hard the religions are willing to work.
Absolutely. Well, you know that these people make up that, right? With all due respect, how hard are religions willing to work at it? Right, agreed. How again, because religions are in fact been based on in my opinion, again, and I mean, I'm part of one, so I criticize mine as much as either, is that we're looking for what each and every one of us can get out of it in so many cases, right? And we lose sight of God, right? Let me be very blunt. If I can, my feeling is if I can, I have people come to the synagogue, for example, and I use my religion and our worship place, and they come to the synagogue and they're coming from other faiths, and they start to come and you wonder why they've come, and so because it's so different. And we talk and we talk, and what we realize is that it's not really they're not really in search of some other way of connecting with God, but in what they can get for themselves out of it. And if that is the reason why you are you're even part of a religion, right, then there are many questions, Ms. Henry. There are many questions. And then if the leadership of the various religions are benefiting to an extent, financially or otherwise, and therefore again have to hold, their intention is to hold power so they can benefit from it in whatever financial, then you're losing sight of what it is that God wants of you, in my opinion. And I criticize all for it. I'm not picking and choosing at all, including ours. Right? And I think but you understand what I'm talking, you talk about real peace. Only real peace can happen is when we learn to accept each other as equals, as norm, and what we do is okay. You understand? And I don't need to convert you to how I think, because I am big enough, or I understand enough, or I'm whatever, have enough ability to understand what you're doing may not entirely be, it's your way, but it's not maybe my way, but it's not the wrong way. Okay. And so I think this is I suppose, something that we'd dream of achieving. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe it's one of these things. As we talk about messiahship, and when the return of the Messiah, I don't think that the way that we act and we think sometimes to each other is going to help. I'll stop there.
All right, thank you for that, Mr. Henriques. And we appreciate your openness and your honesty in critiquing not only, other religions, but your own as well. And that raised a whole lot of other thoughts for us to think about. And actually wanted to bring in Shanique at this time to share some of the thoughts that persons are or have in the chats. Shanique?
Okay, Marlon. So as we said earlier, it's a very interesting topic, and the conversation keeps going in the chats. But just to point this out, and I think it is very important, where Reverend Major Campbell mentioned, as we spoke about chosen, he commented on Facebook and said, as it relates to being chosen, it is indeed loose. It is a loose word, and it, however, means that Israel was chosen to accomplish the purpose of God. However, often they failed to do so. Hence, Christ's parables about those invited to the feast who did not attend. And I think that's important for us to rest on as we discussed in terms of, who is chosen and what chosen really means. And just a comment that was shared on YouTube, Pauline Green said, I think we need a wider panel to get more balanced discussion, because who speaks for the Arabs and who will speak to the church's response? And it's a good segue to invite everybody. September with a twist. We're used to a panel discussion, and this time we're having individual speakers. So there's more to come. Mr. Henriques was here and he gave us his views and his thoughts, and we really appreciate it. But there's more to come, guys. There's more discussion to be had. So you just have to come out next week, Wednesday, and we'll continue this discussion. But the conversation continues in the chat.
All right, thank you for that, Shanique. And as we're continuing, Mr. Henriques, do you have any closing views on the topic that you wanted to share with us?
Actually, I think I did a little bit from Eleanor's question, right? But suffice it to say, as I said in the beginning, this, and as Shanique actually made a very relevant point, there's a lot to discuss. This is not a simple situation. Religion has never been simple, right? Has never been simple. And religions religious perspectives on how problems are dealt with has never been easy. Never. Right? It's always been a bit complicated because of the various views. It's almost as varied as one's opinions on vaccine, if you want, right? But I would like to say is that unfortunately, as I said in the beginning, the Middle East is a hotbed not only of religious differences but of political one-upmanship and power. And we have to, I think, if we understand that as the base of what the issue is, then I think the different religions, as I have served in many different forums and spoken in different forums and shared, we'll find that we're those of us who really do understand what it is, or try to understand what our God wants of us, and not what we want for ourselves and our own personal aggrandizement, if you wish. A big word, but nonetheless, right? We will then start to understand what it is that we have to do. Okay, it's different. I'll give you another, and my closing example is this: my wife is a Catholic, right? And she raised my children Jewish at my request. Okay, and we've lived a most wonderful life together. We've been married for 35 years. We've known each other for nearly 40, right? We have been able to understand that there are differences in how we worship. But this does not mean that it has to create animosity, right, between us, right? In fact, we look for the common denominators that bring us together as a family, right, than those that split us apart. My wife comes to the synagogue with me often, right, and she prays with me, as well as if she wishes me, if she asks me to come to the Catholic Church with her, I will not say no, because there's nothing in the worship, there's nothing in the basis of the faith that is going against my morals, okay, and my values. It's the same with your own Anglican church. My mother is an Anglican, all right, born and bred, and she too married a Jewish man who they have lived together for 60 years now, over 60 years together, and have raised a family and understood that our differences are not to split us apart, but to bring us together. Okay, and we can find that common ground if we wish to, right? If we wish to, right? So that's probably my closing remark, is if it is that we are not looking to force and to again look for a method to promote ourselves and our own personal agendas, but understand that if we work together, we find plenty common ground. I think that is a definite and purposeful way to deal with some of the crises around this world, but especially so in the Middle East. May I finish there?
All right, thank you for that, Mr. Henriques.
Right.
What a way to end. and it brings home the thought that, and by definition of what we're doing here, conversations around the diocese, around the world, and among the different religions. That is a very important point on which to close off our segment, because to know that, first of all, the conflict isn't as simple as we all thought, and that it is not necessarily religious, but more political, and that if we look more at the religious side of it, we realize that there are very small, for some persons, it may be insignificant differences in how we worship that separate us. But it's not really a matter of separation, but it is a call for all of us to sit around that table and to have conversations and to continue to exercise fellowship with one another. And I think that's very important for us to do. And again, if it is that we're going to be dealing with the conflict, it must begin with conversations.
Absolutely.
So I really want to thank you, Mr. Henriques, for sharing with us, for enlightening us. Certainly, I have learned quite a lot tonight. And also wanted to say thanks as well to our viewers. You have been really good at, asking your questions and sharing your comments. I don't even have to ask. You really challenged Mr. Henriques tonight with some of those really stirring questions.
Really, so what really did. Really did,
So,
may I just say one thing, Marlon? May I thank Miss Eleanor Henry for her absolute unwavering insistence that I be part of this, and her never giving up with me, and always sort of encouraging. I thank you, ma'am. Tonight has been entirely enjoyable for me too. Hard, yes, but that's okay. Nothing good comes easy. All right, and it would be my pleasure to do this again, and whenever, and hope maybe even to, since I understand it sort of starts up in St. Jude's a little bit. All right, the Anglican Diocese. Your past bishop is a friend of mine, and I've known his family for a long time, and it would be my pleasure to visit and to share at any time. Thank you.
that would be amazing.
Right.
That would be amazing.
Yeah.
And so, with that said, September with a Twist continues next week, Wednesday at 7 p.m. And we hope that the conversation continues outside of this segment and that you will continue to engage Mr. Henriques and other persons as we continue the conversations around the diocese. I just wanted to close off by reminding us about some of the objectives of conversations around the diocese. And it is to provide a forum for people to have open conversations around pertinent issues, like the church's response to the Middle East conflict. We also look at ways to help people navigate the world from a theologically and scripturally informed perspective, and to equip people to pray aright. So join us next week, same time, same place, as we continue the conversations around the diocese. Good night and all the best.
All right. Shalom.